Coming to you from Jacksonville, Florida, this is GovLove, a podcast about local government brought to you by engaging local government leaders. I'm Ben Kittelson, Senior Consultant at Ref Telus and GovLove co-host. We've got a great episode for you today. We're talking management and local government in Phoenix, Arizona. But first, the best way to support GovLove is to become an ELGO member. ELGO is a professional association engaging the brightest minds in local government. Now, let me introduce today's guest. Jeff Barton is the city manager for the city of Phoenix, Arizona, a position he's been in since October of 2021. And prior to taking the city manager job, he spent more than 20 years at the city of Phoenix, beginning his career as an internal auditor and working his way up the organization, including roles as budget and research director, deputy city manager, and most recently, assistant city manager. So with that, Jeff, welcome to GovLove. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, very excited. We can kind of celebrate a little over a year of being on the job and talk about some of the things you've been able to do.
Yeah,
so.
survived my first year.
Yeah. Awesome. So we have a tradition on GovLove to get to know our guests a little better using a lightning round. So my first question for you, what book are you currently reading?
Okay. So I'm in my pleasure reading phase, so it's nothing profound. So I'm a Halloween nut. So for 30 days of October, I watch a bunch of scary movies, and I also reread a scary novel. So I'm rereading Salem's Lot right now. So I'm almost finished.
Very nice. Any standouts from the scary movie watch during October?
No, I kind of have this random 30 days schedule that I put together. My wife hates it because she hates scary movies.
Yeah.
I love scary movies.
Very nice. All right, so my next linear question, kind of on this theme, I guess. What was the last movie you saw in theaters or streamed?
The last movie we went to see was The Woman King.
Mm.
Yep, it was pretty good.
That's on my list. Was it good? Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty good. It was better than I thought it was going to be going into it. It was actually, Viola Davis did a good job. I think the movie was really well done.
Very cool. Awesome. And then what was the first concert that you went to?
Oh, it was a Run DMC, Dougie Fresh, and Slick Rick concert. Actually.
Wow. Awesome. In Phoenix or?
No, back in Philly.
Back in Philly. Cool. Very cool. All right, then my last linear question for you. Where do you go for inspiration?
For me, three places really. My grandmother, who is my angel, and the person that inspired me to be more than what I probably ever saw in myself. I think second is, I went to Morehouse College, so Morehouse kind of pushes us to kind of do a lot. We've got lofty expectations of Morehouse graduates and Morehouse men. And then third, I would say my family, wanting to live up and make a name for me and my family.
That's awesome. Yeah, very cool. So one of the things I always like to hear about is how folks ended up in local government and kind of a little bit about their career path. So for you, how did you end up at the city of Phoenix? And you spent your whole career there, so we can also learn a little about that. But how did you end up in local government and working for the city?
So I think for me, I always wanted to be in local government in some capacity. I think when I first went to Morehouse, the plan for me was to go to law school, and I was going to go to law school. My younger brother got into some trouble back home, and so instead of going to law school, I decided to go to grad school first, and I would go to law school after. That didn't work out as planned, so I graduated really quickly since he wasn't doing what I wanted him to do. But I finished my master's in 2.5 semesters, and I burned myself out and didn't want to go to law school after that. I had met my wife when I was at Morehouse. She was across the street at Spelman. We were a year apart. And so she was finishing up her senior year at Spelman when I was finishing up my master's in Pennsylvania. And she was like, I'm not living in Philly. So if we're going to stay together, we're coming to Arizona, which is where she grew up. Okay. And so she brought me out here. And then I just started working for the city of Phoenix as an internal auditor. And like you said, I kind of worked my way up from that perspective.
Yeah. So what kept you at the city? Like was there something that you're like, hey, this is the right place for me, or like something you have to work on there?
Yeah, for me, I think, one, being in local government, to me, that's where the real change happens, because then you're really affecting people's lives on a daily basis. I think that was one thing. I think the other thing for me is I grew up in the projects and government housing. And so we didn't have a lot, not just my family, but our neighborhood didn't have a lot. And so I was in school with other people that lived quite a bit different than we did. And so I always wanted to be able to kind of give folks an opportunity to have in those underserved and underprivileged areas. And I thought that local government gave me a better opportunity for that. in terms of the city and why I stayed specifically in this city, because I've had opportunities to go other places. This city it's a little bit unique in my perspective. When I first got here, the city of Phoenix was winning all kinds of awards. I do say that we were a small town, but a big city in name, because it really hadn't come into its own yet. We were fifth and sixth, flip-flopping back and forth between Philly and Phoenix all the time. But we really didn't have a big city presence and a big city mentality. And that's kind of evolved over the years. And now we get all the big city pain and politics that go with being a big city. But there's a family relationship at the city. The other thing I think that I really like about the city is this kind of Phoenix mentality that we're all a part of something bigger. And unlike a lot of other places, the city encourages our employees to kind of move throughout the organization rather than leave the organization. And, with a city this size, with over 15,000 employees and over 30 departments, we dabble in a little bit of everything. And so you have an opportunity to scratch almost whatever itch you may have from a professional development standpoint. And I've just always felt really, really good here. It's also given me a great work-life balance, which was important to me because I didn't grow up with a father in my house. And I always told myself that when I had kids and had a wife, that they were going to be priorities, and I didn't want to have to sacrifice my time with them, because you only get one opportunity to be a father, and that's 18 years of a formidable life, that you have with your children. But you have your entire life to be called director, boss, whatever. And, I didn't want to sacrifice my kids at the expense of career development and growth. So the city gave me an opportunity to really be very thoughtful and strategic, and at my own pace. I decided when I wanted to move. I had opportunities to be director before I became budget director, and I said no for a variety of reasons. And I did it on my schedule and on my time. And in a lot of places, if you say no, that sometimes will hurt you. And it didn't hurt me in my career.
So I'm just curious, like, how'd you come to those kind of decisions? How do you kind of balance that? Like, this is, what might be best for me personally versus your career? Like, how did you kind of say no to some of those opportunities?
Yeah, I think for me, it was easy. I think, one, like I said, not having that father presence in my house, I always wanted that. Not to say I suffered, because I think my grandmother gave me everything she possibly could, and my grandfather as well. But I wanted to be an active father. I wanted to be able to coach my kids' sports teams. I wanted to be able to go to their little school concerts and school plays. And so that to me was more of a priority than chasing money and chasing a title, which I felt I had my whole life to do. The other thing I'll say is, for me, it was also a big deal in terms of who I work for. And there were a couple of times where, if I was offered a director position, I may or may not have respected the person that would have been over me at the time. And so I didn't want to take that job knowing that I had philosophical or ethical differences than with the person that I would have been reporting to.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, and, having spent so long in one organization, how is, and you mentioned that the city's kind of grown up in that time too. It's gotten bigger. It's gotten more big city. So like, how has the city maintained its like kind of culture over that time? Like, how do you think that's, because obviously like leadership has changed in that time, and there's a lot more employees, I imagine, than maybe when you first started. Even like, how do you kind of maintain that like family culture that you referenced and that desire to retain folks?
I think part of it is, the retention thing. I think everybody is struggling with right now, retention and recruiting. I think everybody is struggling with post-COVID, for a variety of reasons. I think when I look back over time, the one thing that we do a really good job of is protecting our employee, valuing our employee. Now, some may differ as to how much value, right? You never give employees enough if they ask, right? But I think this city does a great job we constantly tell our employees, and we tell our council, and we tell our community that the most valuable resource we have are our people. We would not have won all the awards that we win, accomplished all the things that we accomplished, provide the services that we provide without our employees. And I think we take every opportunity that we have to enforce that and reinforce that idea with our employees. I think a lot of it too is just the mindset and the type of person that gravitates to the city of Phoenix. You're generally speaking, if you're in government, you're not looking to get filthy rich. You want to make a difference in people's lives. And I think that is something that we all share here at the city. And I think that's probably equally shared across, municipal government. That's generally speaking what people care about and what they want to accomplish. And, I think being a city manager form of government versus a strong mayor form of government, I think it also gives us a little bit more stability. And with that stability, you're able to cultivate culture, I think, better than the constant churn of a strong mayor that replaces everything when they come in.
Mm. Yeah, that's a really good point. Just the system or the form of government probably impacts that ability to maintain a culture. Yeah, interesting. So I definitely want to talk about kind of your first year on the job, but I'm always curious about kind of the transition, right? From being a director or an assistant city manager and making that switch. But so maybe can we start? I don't know what the best point to start is, but can you talk maybe about like some of the work you did either as your budget director or as assistant and deputy, and kind of how that maybe prepared you, or maybe, I don't know, maybe made you think about like taking that next step to city manager?
Of course. So one thing I always tell folks is not to rush it. I think a lot of times with younger folks, they're in a hurry to get a title. They're in a hurry to, achieve some level of success, which for a lot of people, they equate it with money and title. But, being kind of the methodical person I am and, auditor by trade and just kind of very analytical and the way I think is more in terms of, I think of systems and processes. I've seen people rush to get jobs too fast and they're not ready for them. And it hurts them more than it helps them. And so for me, early in my career, when I first started with audit, I moved really quickly. I think I started as an auditor 1, 3 months after that, I was an auditor 2, 6 months after that, I was an auditor 3, 8 months or so after that, I became a management assistant 2 in budget and research. I left audit to go to budget and research because audit's always after the fact, and I wanted to see things before the decisions were made and before you're asked to clean it up. So I went to budget and research, and I honestly thought I'd go to budget for 3, 4, 5 years, learn that process, and then ultimately go back to audit because it meshed well with my analytical mind. However, I got to budget and research, and I really just fell in love with the work because it's not just budget, it's budget and research. So you also do some of the same type process improvements that I was asked to do in audit. So it really gave me a lot of what I needed in my own just kind of, mind to be happy as an employee. But it also gave me that work-life balance that I talked about. So I was an MA2, a management assistant 2 in budget and research from 2001 to 2007, I believe. And then in 2007, I became deputy budget and research director. And I did that up until 2014 when I became director. Again, I had opportunities I was asked to be director before, and I said no. Because for some of the reasons I discussed earlier. And then when I became budget director in 2014, I was budget director from 2014 to right February of 2019, right before COVID hit us. And I wasn't looking to be a deputy city manager, so I wasn't looking to leave budget and research, but the city manager at the time, Ed Zerker, he and I always had a great relationship. He asked if I'd be interested in moving downstairs to deputy city manager. And I was like, I kind of like being in budget director. I got my own thing. It's like, I don't, it's my own little world. He's like, yeah, but I think you'd be really good at it. So I thought about it, talked it over with my wife, came downstairs, and at that time we were in the middle of our budget process. And so things were good. We had a surplus, but then COVID hits. And so that surplus in 2 weeks goes from a surplus to a deficit.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't able to replace the budget director because he said I had to do both jobs. So for 9 months, I was budget director and deputy city manager.
Fun.
Yeah, fun. And during COVID. But what I think that did is, so he gave me kind of the reins in terms of handling not just the financial side of what COVID was doing to us and what our response was going to be from a financial perspective, because we were bleeding revenue those first couple of months. And we were fearful that we'd have to make some really, really tough cuts. And then we got the coronavirus relief fund that went to state and local governments. And, I think we were the first city, according to Treasury, we were one of the first cities in the country, if not the first, to actually craft a strategic plan in terms of how we were going to use those funds, get council to formally adopt them, and also using it as a means to offset revenue and prop up and not have to make cuts. So Treasury kind of allowed, or they asked us to kind of do presentations for other cities, asked us to share our strategic plan, how we went about developing it, all that good stuff. But in the process of doing that, I think the council got to see me in a different light, more so than just this financial person. I think they also saw me kind of, leading and managing. And so a year after that, the city manager comes down, and he says, I want you to be assistant city manager. So I came down, I think I have my times wrong. I came down here in February of 20, right before COVID. Mm-hmm. And then in March of 21, he asked me to be assistant city manager. So I didn't really have time to even sit in my deputy city manager role that long to acclimate. And I was like, are you sure I'm ready for this? He's like, yeah, you're ready. I was like, okay. And so I became assistant city manager in March of 21. And then I was in California at Surf Cup with my son, who played competitive soccer. We were in the finals. Phone rings early in the morning, like 7:30 in the morning, and the boss is like, hey, I need to talk to you. I know your son's on the field getting ready to play the finals. I was like, okay, what's up? We got a couple minutes. And he says, I want to retire. I'm like, everybody saw that coming. We knew it wasn't long. I was just like, okay, you want to retire? What are we talking about? I was thinking he was going to say a year or so. He's like, no, I want to go in October. So this was in like July or June or July. And I was like, okay, you just put me in this job. Now you're leaving. And he says, but I needed to talk to you first because I at least need to make sure that you're comfortable being acting city manager while the council goes through their process. And so I was like, yeah, I'll be acting, but I have no desire whatsoever to be city manager. None. Zero. None at all. And he said, okay, that's fine. We'll talk to council. And so the council they spent the next couple of weeks, months deliberating on the process that they were going to go through to, have a new city manager, nationwide search, headhunters, all that good stuff. In the midst of all that, I had several of them come to me and ask, why I didn't want the job, because they had all heard that I didn't want it. And I'm a brutally honest person. And so I explained some of the reasons as to why I didn't want the job. Some of which included my family, some of which also included, just some operational concerns and things that I witnessed over my time at the city. And then, so I was like, and that was that. And so then one day I'm sitting in my office, Ed, the city manager, comes into my office again. He's like, hey, council wants to talk to you. They're in e-session. So I'm like, okay, great. So I go in there. And they're like, well, we've been batting this around for the past hour and a half, 2 hours about the process. And we all kept coming back to the same thing. Even if we brought somebody in from the outside, the heavy lift is going to be done by you. You're going to do all the real hard work because you know the city. This person won't if we go outside. Mm-hmm. And they're like, that's not really fair to you. And so then they were just like, let's have a conversation about the things that you were kind of concerned about. And would you be interested if we could address those things?
Yeah.
And usually, again, I'm an auditor by trade and I'm a budget person. So no is the easiest thing for me to say in the world. And I'm also a father. So saying no is easy. But for some reason that day I couldn't say no. And I don't know why. I honestly don't know why. And so I agreed. We worked out the contractual issues and my concerns. And here we are a year later. I'm city manager.
Wow. Wow. That's such a fascinating recruitment process. I don't know if that's quite the right word. You were kind of voluntold, I guess.
in a way, but and I think part of what they all kept saying is like, because I didn't want the job, that almost made me the perfect person, because I don't want it I didn't want it for my own glory. I always want to do the right thing for the city. I'm, a lot of times because of the politics and because of the nature of the political process and the cycle of our council members, we make a lot of myopic decisions that are for the short term, not long term. And I struggle with that because I always want to do what's best for the city, not just for right now or next week or next year, but for the long term. And that was kind of some of what I wanted to talk to them about. And so for those reasons, I think, they were able to understand where my perspective was. And I wanted to be able to kind of, to some degree, have free reign to fix a lot of things that in my mind were broken and that needed to be, fixed. And so I was walking in at a time where I think it honestly would have been hard to find somebody. I mean, we had DOJ just popped up on our door in August of that year. So
Yeah.
with our police department pattern and practice, investigation. And you're still in the midst of COVID. You're having issues hiring and retaining people. So I mean, it wasn't easy, right? So I think I'm not afraid of challenge. I'm not afraid of tough situations. And again, the way I think through things, I like to think through how can I make things better for the long term. And I think that's what they saw and that they were gravitating to.
Yeah. Well, and I want to move to some of the stuff you worked on and that transition, but you said something interesting there about the long term versus short term. You wanting to do more of the long term focus, and council by its very nature, I would say in any organization, it tends to be more focused on short term.
Yeah.
So how have you balanced that over kind of your first year just on the job? Like, how do you kind of keep that? Because I'm sure it's easy for them to say yes, and when they're looking for someone, and as you said, it's probably a tough environment to have brought somebody in.
Right.
Easy for them to say yes to that at the time, but over the course of the year, like how do you kind of keep that balance and keep that or remind them that that's some of your focus?
I think with me, it was somewhat I won't say easy, but because of the time when I was budget director, me and the former city manager, Ed Zerker, we were cleaning up a lot of mess essentially that we inherited from previous administrations, financial decisions, like I say, that were short term, not long term. And so we spent during that time that I was budget director, those 5.5 years, he and I spent a lot of time cleaning that up. During that, prior to me being budget director, we had all kinds of deficits. We were making cuts. We had to cut employee compensation. When I became budget director, we got rid of that situation. I brought on more robust 5-year forecast modeling. I started doing stress testing, which wasn't really being done before, to shock our revenues, to show council how bad things could get if we didn't really pay attention to the future and making very short-term decisions. We also impressed on them the importance of having a reserve and not spending every dime that you have in surplus. And so I think a lot of what I did with them as budget director translated to when I became deputy city manager and navigating them through COVID. I think I had a little bit of cachet build up with them that they wanted to follow the logic and the reasoning of, because again, we restored employee compensation. We were probably, even when COVID was really bad for us the first year or so, we were probably the only major city in the country that did not cut employees, didn't cut compensation, didn't cut programs, didn't cut services to our residents. Instead, we expanded services and we expanded compensation for our employees. And it was a sustainable expansion. It wasn't just things that we did and propped up with grant funds or ARPA funds or stimulus dollars. We were methodical about propping up things that we knew we could sustain moving forward.
Yeah, and what a great example of why you do that responsible financial planning, right? Of preparing for an emergency like COVID and being able to do kind of what you were able to do. That's amazing. So when you kind of first entered the job, what were some of those focus areas that council had you working on, or how did you kind of get your feet under you and know what to focus on in the first few weeks and months?
Yeah, well, it was definitely drinking from the proverbial hose or fire. I think the main thing that I wanted to communicate, one, was to my employees first and foremost, that one, I'm there to support you, including the police department that was going through the pattern and practice study. But I want to make it very honest, and I want to be very open with my employees that I will support, just like the proud parent, right? You'll support your kids. When they're doing great, you want to be their biggest cheerleader. But it's a double-edged sword. When you mess up, I'm holding you accountable. I'm not going to continue to sweep things under the rug, because I think that's where some of our systemic issues have come, because we haven't taken quick, prompt, and prudent action when things don't go the way they're supposed to go. And so I've been very honest about that with my employees. I've made it a point to go out to my police department. For example, I'm hitting every shift at every precinct and talking to the officers. It's funny. It's actually sad and shocking. But when I go and do these visits, I've got officers out there 20, 30 years, and they're like, we've never had a city manager come sit and talk to us and have a conversation, have a dialogue, not just talk to us, but talk with us and ask us what's important. That was shocking to me. I wanted to make more strategic and smart decisions based on data. And so I revamped the city manager's dashboard. We had a dashboard that, It's shameful that it was even called a dashboard in the past.
Yeah.
It had like 20 measures on it, and the measures were hand drawn. It wasn't updated frequently. And so one of the first things that we did is we expanded that dashboard. I think I have over 120 plus measures on my new dashboard.
Yeah.
It's aesthetically pleasing, easy to navigate, and it's updated very frequently. And it really hits on the things that departments care about, that our employees care about, that our citizens care about, and our council cares about. And some of the things, just being honest, again, it's not about picking measures that make us look good. It's picking measures that tell the honest truth. If we're failing, we need to let people know we're failing. If we're doing a great job, we need to celebrate doing a great job. But even with the failure, it shows us where we're vulnerable, or where we need to improve, or why we may need to do something differently. And so I think that's been a very successful rollout of a project. The other thing that I'm really focused on, which is going to take some doing, and you may know this just from talking to others and just being in this industry, strategic planning isn't something that elected officials generally like, because they feel like it boxes them in when they want more flexibility. But absent a real strategic plan, we have a strategic plan, but it's something that was put together with staff with very little council input or community input. And absent a strategic plan, in my opinion, we're always chasing. We're not forward thinking. We're being more responsive as opposed to being offensive. And so I'm committed to revamping our strategic plan, getting council buy-in and getting community buy-in, and tying that strategic plan to all these other disparate plans that we've got, like climate action plan, heat readiness plan, homelessness action plan, housing plan, water plan, all these different plans. With our general plan, strategic plan, they all need to be aligned, and we all need to have data and metrics that we can show how we're moving the needle.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So have you started a strategic planning process?
I've started it with a very small group of people that I'm using to kind of plot my course. I'm probably I'm waiting until after our election process to really get moving forward, because again, I don't think it's appropriate to do it if my council body is going to change. I need the consistent council to be there. So we'll probably start with some department head meetings in the spring on the summer break when the council's gone, and then bring some ideas and suggestions back to our council. The other thing that we're doing right now is we're doing a bond program, which we haven't had one in 16 years.
Yeah. Yeah. No. There's a lot there that I want to ask more about, and we'll get to the bond program for sure. But so the performance dashboard, when I preparing for this interview, I saw that on your guys' website, and I was like, this is definitely a former budget director. So. Is there anything in particular that you'd highlight that this is really like a great measure that I'm glad that we're publicly reporting on now, or just a focus area that you're like, this was part of why I wanted to do this? Or
I think a lot of it. I think a lot of times in the past we picked measures that made us look good, and to me that's not fair to our employees. It's not fair to our departments. It's not fair to our residents or our council. And so I wanted to be honest. And so, we show that our response times for police and fire, they're not great, right? We show that our public records turnaround time is not great. But then at the same time, we show other measures like, our bond ratings and our finances and things like that are really top notch. We're able to show, some of our planning and our neighborhood services type measures, our library measures, our parks measures. Those are all really good things. And I think it's important for folks to see that. So I think for me, just having the dashboard be an honest reflection of where we are is what I take pride in. It's not something that I designed going into, with the intent of making us look great. And I told all of our department heads that, and they struggled with that because they didn't want to choose any measures that were going to be problematic for them. And I said, no, we're going to be honest and we're going to be transparent, because what I was trying to explain to them is if you're able to show the council that this one program that they really care about, you're not doing so well in, that's your opportunity to get more resources if you need them, or to pivot away from that program if that's not where we need to be. And so they all got it, and now they all see the value. We used to have, they were not true measures, in my opinion. We had things that were just bean counts of things, counts of how many people walked in the door, counts of this. That's not real measures. And so getting people to understand a performance metric and measure versus a count was also an educational process for them.
Yeah. Is that something you go over with your council now, that of the that kind of dashboard, or is it just internal for staff and kind of leadership
Well,
to
it's
pay
both.
attention to?
We don't formally go over it with the council, but they get it every month. They look at it. We
Hmm.
also started this when I was budget director too. We had these quarterly economic indicators that we started putting together for them,
Oh,
so
cool.
they could get a sense of the economy. So they were used to me telling stories with data and
Yeah.
attaching finances and resources and staff allocations to data. So I think the dashboard was just the natural progression
Hmm.
on a larger scale.
Yeah. Interesting. So real quick, the economic indicators, is that just like like kind of looking at leading metrics around like sales tax, or like what kind of things are you?
Yeah, it's sales tax. It's also housing permits. It's
Mm,
water accounts. It's all the things that tell you, it's kind of like a economic health indicator report or
yeah.
scorecard of your city.
Yeah. Yeah. Because those things are going to change before you start seeing them in the
Exactly.
revenues. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. Especially considering some of our revenue is collected by the state and it's given to us 2 years in arrears. So
Yeah.
you don't even really know, what you're looking at unless you're really astute. But the other thing we prided ourselves on when I was budget director, we really tightened up our ability to forecast. So our revenue forecast used to be kind of all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then the 5 years that I was budget director, we developed a brand new econometric model
Wow.
that allowed us to really, we worked with the state, we worked with ASU, U of A, and some other economists to kind of fine tune it. And I've got a really great team of revenue analysts in budget and research. But I'd say last almost a decade now, our revenue projections have been within 1% on over $1
Wow.
billion worth of revenue. And that doesn't happen that often, as you know.
No. Wow.
So,
That's
yeah.
very impressive. Wow. That's really cool. Wow. Is there more like do you have anything on your website about kind of how you guys do those projections, or is that just kind of part of your internal process? It'd
We
be
don't,
fascinating to.
yeah, we don't have the detailed information out there, but we do a monthly revenue report for the council that is out there on the website. But if you really want to talk about the econometric model and things like that, we could sit down, me, you, the budget director, and my revenue analyst, and we could actually have a very in-depth conversation
Oh yeah.
about that process.
We'd lose all our listeners, but I'm down for that follow up. Yeah. That's fascinating. Very cool. So you mentioned the Geo bond program. So where's that at in the process? What are the kind of things you guys are trying to do with that?
Yeah, well, can I give you a little background first
Yeah,
on
please,
Geo?
please.
So, being Arizona, we're a tax averse group for the most part, and so we haven't had a bond program since 2006.
Wow.
And a city our size should have a bond program every 5 to 7 years at a minimum.
Hmm.
Um, our bond programs are financed with the secondary property tax, and so nobody wanted to see a tax increase. And so the last bond program that we had was $873 million. It was in 2006. Obviously, the financial crisis happened in 2007, 2008. So we initially, right out the bat, had to defer about $150 million of that bond program.
Hmm.
It's a very similar story to the 88 bond program process that we had.
Yeah, yeah.
And so for the last couple of years, myself and the former CFO had been talking to the city manager like, hey, we got to do a bond program. We're placing a lot of pressure on the operating budget because things that would have otherwise been in a bond program are having to be paid for out of the operating budget, and that takes away a lot of flexibility to pay staff to do programming and things like that. And so back in 2019, we actually started. We had an acting mayor at the time because our mayor Greg Stanton left to run for Congress, and so we had an acting mayor who wanted to run a bond program, but specifically for public safety. So we stood up a fiscal capacity committee, went through some exercise, but then again, COVID hit. So we had to kind of put that on the shelf. And so then we brought it back, earlier this year. And we were walking them through all of these different machinations of what a bond program could look like. I was of the opinion that our previous bond programs were too large for us to do them in a reasonable time frame, which is why they always stretched out to this 10 to 15 year mark, because there was too much in them. And so I also was trying to convince the city manager at the time that we could do a bond program if you allow me to structure it right that doesn't require a property tax increase, because I take the expiration of the existing debt, layer on new debt up to the existing property tax rate. And so that would tell me how much we could afford, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then also using the 5-year forecast to determine how much new operating costs we can absorb from the new bond program. So went through all that exercise. We came up with this number of 500 million is what we could do in this new bond program. I can do it without raising property taxes, and I can swallow between 40 to 60 million dollars worth of net new operating cost in that same 5-year window that this bond program will last. But even better than that, to me, I'm trying to set the tone for the council. We can do 4 bond programs over the next 20 years.
Yeah.
And each one of those will be at a minimum $500 million, possibly up to 7. So you'll have $2 billion worth of investment without raising 1 cent of tax.
Wow.
By using the expiration of your existing debt. And so we're now in the process. We've completed all of our subcommittee work. Now we're at the executive committee, and they're trying to finalize a formal recommendation to our council on what will be included in the $500 million program. That election will be in November of 23. And some of the things that we've got in there, obviously, we've got new libraries, we've got new fire stations, we've got new parks, we've got, money in for Vision Zero, which are pedestrian safety measures. We've got money in for, pavement maintenance. We've got money in for, some of our arts and cultural facilities, ADA accommodations, building out a Latino Cultural Center, building up a program around our Rio Salado area of the city, and just a whole variety of things, as well as catching up with deferred maintenance.
Yeah. And so were those projects just like on your CIP list and have been kind of aware for a while, or
no.
Is that no?
So what we did is we actually, prior to when we wrapped up with our fiscal capacity committee and they said, hey, we agree with staff's recommendation, we can do 500 million, not just be public safety. We'll do citywide. We started working on a capital needs assessment, department by department. So I had each department work on a very detailed capital needs assessment. And obviously, the needs are greater than what we have capacity for. So the total needs that came in from our departments were about 1.2 billion. So our last bond program I mentioned in 2006, we did an $873 million program. At the time, there was $3.2 billion worth of needs. So a lot of those needs obviously would have exhausted and not been the same today. So we recast the net, identified new projects, new programs, and then went through each individual subcommittee area to determine which programs were going to be recommended to the executive committee, who then ultimately has the task of recommending a complete package to the council.
Wow. Very cool. And what's the kind of, you mentioned, Arizona, not unlike a lot of places, not big fans of raising taxes. So, but your plan wouldn't do that. But what's kind of been the resident engagement aspect of all of this, or what's the plan for that?
Yeah, so very similar to what we did when I was budget director. We actually stood up, I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's called Fund Phoenix, FUNDPHX. It's a tool that we worked with a balancing act to actually have an online budget tool for residents to give us feedback on the budget process. We're using that same tool. We use that same tool to kind of pitch bond program ideas to our residents. Residents were able to also attend our subcommittee meetings and submit their own ideas for projects and have those vetted by staff and the committee. And they could also send emails, and they're also able to attend our executive committee meetings as well. And all of those meetings are taped, televised. They're on our YouTube channel, and you can watch them on live stream as well.
That's awesome. Cool. Well, so we'll have to stay tuned on your campaign and see what happens next year. That's awesome. So, I saw this as I was prepping for kind of our interview that you guys had hired a public health advisor. And so I know it's a new position, and you're probably still figuring that out, like what that role looks like and how that will interact with your leadership team. But I'm just curious, it's a new role for the city. Like what were you kind of looking for, and why do you want to add that kind of skill set?
Yeah, one thing that we saw during COVID is, one, you have to understand the dynamics of the city of Phoenix, Maricopa County, and the state of Arizona. So the city of Phoenix does not have a public health arm, and by statute, we're not technically allowed to play in certain areas of public health. That falls to the county. And so the county provides oversight, guidance, and kind of direction to us, and what we learned during the pandemic, sometimes that guidance wasn't fast enough. and it didn't give us enough specificity on how to protect our residents and our staff when we were running certain programs. So we actually during the time that the emergency order was out from the governor and the mayor, we had a process that we stood up internally with a group of department heads and the assistant city manager at the time, and we consulted with a public health expert that we brought on contract to give us guidance as to how many people could we have in rooms, how big of events could we have. Spring training was a thing. How do we make sure people are safe at spring training, and do we shroud seats? When do we allow residents to come back in City Hall and other city spaces? And so through all of that, I think our council started to get a little bit frustrated with the direction or lack thereof that we were getting from time to time from county, as well as just the conflicting information between county, state, and the feds. And so they, at that time, their insight and their foresight was that we needed our own kind of public health professional. We obviously understand the relationship between us and the county and the state, but somebody that can liaison with them, speak the same language, and give us real-time recommendations, as well as just do kind of some assessments on some of the programs that we operate, and making sure that public health is a focus of what we do. I mean, we operate Head Start, right? Making sure that those programs are safe. We got fire programs like our baby shots programs and other things that we just need to make sure. I mean, now that we've got, these infectious and communicable diseases that kind of are starting to, be more and more prevalent, just making sure that we had someone on team and on, available to us that could help give us some direction.
Yeah. Well, and also, like, there's so many programs, like you mentioned, that within cities generally, not only your fire or parks and rec, but also just transportation and ways that you can impact public health that are beyond just like the traditional like county public health department. So adding that skill set, I think, is probably helpful in like aligning some of those resources too.
Right.
Yeah. Very cool. So, thinking back, it's been a year. You can reflect a little bit. What, looking back on your first year, what's maybe surprised you in your first year on the job, or yeah.
Yeah, I think, we all have this when we look at somebody and we work so closely with somebody that's doing the job above you, not that they make the job look easy, but you think you have a better understanding of what the job entails.
Yeah.
And I also think that, the expectations from one person to the next are different with your bosses. And so I think because my council knows how I was being used before, kind of like as this little mini consultant, if you will, throughout the city. Yeah. Even when I was budget director, a lot of people always say I was functioning kind of as a DCM, a deputy city manager at the time even. I think council has expectations on me that might have been different than my former boss, the former city manager. And I think the biggest thing for me is just knowing the job doesn't stop. It's literally 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, which is it's hard from a personal standpoint. I mean, thank goodness my kids are all, in college or graduating high school at this point, because I think that would have been something I struggled with. I think personally, I know, my wife doesn't really understand, I think sometimes the late night calls or having to run to the hospital for officer involved shooting or just the weekends. It's a lot. And my wife is also a public servant. And so it's I think, it's just the amount of time it consumes and the intensity and that it never lets up is something that I think is probably the most surprising to me.
Yeah. Do you have any, how have you managed that? Do you have any tips for folks that struggle with that kind of balance?
I think part of it is you do have to set healthy boundaries, which I know is hard to do when you've got somebody calling you all the time or on the weekends. I think you just have to establish boundaries up front, because if you don't, then you can't establish those later once folks have gotten used to it. So, I try to make a point, when I get home, I need to have a couple of hours with my family to have dinner and talk about the day. And then I can do some more work afterwards. For the most part, I'd like to try to have my weekends if I can with my family, since I'm giving so much of my time during the week. But, I understand there are also times where you have to go to things on the weekend as well. But I think the main thing is just trying to establish those healthy boundaries up front and setting expectations for everybody.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and as you know, if you doing that at the top, right, that cascades down to the organization. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Awesome. So what's next? I mean, we've talked about a couple things that you're working on currently, but what else it's coming up that we should look out for, that our listeners should pay attention to the city of Phoenix for?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing for us is this bond program. I think we've got an opportunity to have a very successful, not just this bond program, but the future, the next 20 years. And that's what I'm really focused on is making sure that we maintain financial resiliency long after I'm gone. And I want to make sure that, whoever inherits this job after me or any other job that I was in doesn't inherit some of the stuff that I inherited. I want them to have an easy task. I think, I'm excited about the future of our police department. I know a lot of people are down on us right now with the DOJ and things like that. But at the core, I know our officers want to do the right thing. And I know they're all open to this concept of reform because it means for them they're going to get better training. They're going to do things, better. And they're also going to not be responsible for responding to things that they shouldn't be responding to. And so I'm excited about rebuilding and reinvigorating our Phoenix Police Department. I'm also excited about, being able to hopefully get our employee compensation adequately squared away. We're going through a massive class and comp study citywide. We've got like 800 classifications or something crazy like that in the city. So that's going to be huge for our employees to make sure, because, in my mind, we're the 5th largest city in the country, obviously one of the largest employers in Arizona, and we should pay like that. You get what you pay for, right? And so I want the best. I want to recruit the best. I want to retain the best. And we as a city need to make sure that we take care of our employees to make sure that we, achieve that goal. And beyond that, I think I look forward over the next, I'd say 3 to 5 years, the city of Phoenix is going to kind of go back to where we were in the 90s in terms of being that preeminent government entity that was winning all kinds of awards and recognition and accolades. That is my intent. That is my goal.
Very cool. Awesome. Very cool. Well, so our traditional, that's as good of a place as any to wrap up. So our traditional last question on the podcast is usually the hardest one for folks, but if you could be the GovLove DJ, what song would you pick as the exit music for this interview?
Oh gosh, man, that's a hard one. I think I used to be a DJ, to be honest. That's also another way I kind of decompress in the evenings.
Awesome.
So it really I'd have that's a hard question for me because it depends on the type of music and the type of mood that I'm in. But I'm a big hip hop guy. My age, obviously, I grew up in the age of hip hop and breakdancing and all that good stuff. But I also like really good old R&B because I grew up with my grandmother. So I'd probably pick something from one of those two genres. It just depends on the mood. Okay.
What's the mood you're trying to set then?
I think if I was going to say I'd look for something more inspirational, so I'd probably say maybe Change Gonna Come by Sam Cooke.
Perfect. I like it. So we'll get that queued up. For our producer will get that queued up. And with that ends our episode today. Mr. Barton, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your experience and your expertise.
Of course.
And for our listeners, GovLove is brought to you by engaging local government leaders, and the best way to support GovLove is to become an ELGL member. You can reach us online at elgl.org/GovLove or on Twitter at the handle @GovLovePodcast. And subscribe to GovLove on your favorite podcast app. If you're already subscribed, go tell a friend or colleague about this podcast. Help us spread the word that GovLove is the go-to place for local government stories. And with that, thank you for listening. This has been GovLove, a podcast about local government. Change gonna come. Oh, yes, it will.